Hello, thanks for stopping by Trauma and True Crime, where we recognize that trauma and true crime go hand in hand, and we try to show when trauma is happening in real time. Today, we're back on the ongoing trauma of what I call Planet Watts, but what most YouTubers call Watts Island. I like to call it a planet because I feel that normal human life is not really welcome on this planet, and based on what I've just heard, it's liable to get worse for the next few months. Before I get into it, though, I hope you'll think about subscribing, hitting one of those thumbs, or telling me what you think in the comments below, even if you disagree with me. I'm always up for the debate without the hate. For those of you who have not planted yourselves firmly on Watts Island to keep yourselves up to date on every singular change in the action, let me update you a bit and tell you what I think about it, and try to widen your eyes on how to maneuver what's likely to be a very toxic atmosphere. If you're at all interested in the Watts case, I encourage you to watch Critical K's most recent live video entitled "Which Confession Does Chris Watts Stand By?" Later, I'll play one small important snippet from it, but I encourage you to go watch the whole thing so you understand the full context and gravity of the situation. I took copious notes that entire live and the previous live, where Lana, who appears to be among the last people standing with the Watts on their chase for what they call justice. To give you a brief update in the situation, most of you know that since the murder of Shanann, Bella, Cece, and Nico, the Watts family has refused to believe that Chris has had anything to do with the killing of his children, even though he took a plea deal and he has confessed to killing them in multiple ways, in multiple formats, in front of many people on many occasions. I covered this extensively in my last video, which I will link in the description box below, but others have too as well. Now, all true crime watchers know it's not at all unusual for accused murderers' families to want to fight on behalf of their family member, and for members of the public to feel sympathy for the accused murderer's family. It's also not at all unusual for big debates to spark up on social media about the guilt or innocence of a particular subject. Happens all the time. But the Watts family, saying they're doing everything on Chris's behalf, have taken things to an entirely new level. In fact, what I plan to show you by the end of this video is that the Watts have taken that idea to meteoric levels through a divisive, corrosive, and very intentional disinformation campaign. I'm also here to say, as a marketer, that it's likely to fall flat on its face and will achieve precisely the opposite of what the Watts are trying to do with it, in my opinion. Yes, I use the word disinformation. That word didn't get used much until recently, when people started to really understand how misinformation and disinformation can spread like a brush fire across the entire internet and cause real life consequences. But what is the difference between misinformation and disinformation? I'll quote directly from one of my colleagues from the Center of Humane Technology, Renee DiResta. She is now a researcher at the Stanford Internet Observatory, and I seriously never talked to someone with more blow my mind knowledge and insight into how the tools of the internet are used by bad faith actors to change our thoughts and real life actions. Here's a quote from Renee's article in the Yale Review. I'll link to it below, and I wholeheartedly encourage you to read the entire article because it explains in detail how truth can get manipulated, distorted, and escalated over social media through algorithms. Here's what Renee has to say about misinformation and disinformation. Quote, "Misinformation and disinformation are both, at their core, misleading or inaccurate information. What separates them is intent. Misinformation is the inadvertent sharing of false information. The sharer didn't intend to mislead people and genuinely believe the story. Disinformation, by contrast, is the deliberate creation and sharing of information known to be false. It's a malign narrative that is spread deliberately with the explicit aim of causing confusion or leading the recipient to believe a lie." Unquote. Put more simply, misinformation is when I share an article that has false information in it, but I believe it's true, so I'm not deliberately trying to hurt or disparage anyone. Disinformation is when I either create or share a lie with full knowledge that it's a lie, and my intent is to get you and others to believe and act on that lie. Now that you know the difference between misinformation and disinformation, let's do a brief review of how the Watts have conducted themselves since their boy pled guilty to murder. The first thing they did was to go on national television and claim that they were being shut out by law enforcement, that they did not believe for one moment that Chris could have killed his children, and when asked about their own daughter-in-law's murder, took the time on national TV, not very much time that they have, to paint her as a terrible person, presumably to imply that murdering Shanann was a justifiable act of defense. We later learned after the recordings of their calls were released that the Watts did in fact have access to Chris before he took his plea deal, and that he told them numerous times that taking the plea was his choice. Throughout these conversations and other conversations we've now heard from a few weeks later, we find that the Watts continued to refuse to believe him and pressured him incessantly to let them fight for him. You hear Cindy telling him in one of these early calls that he has thousands of supporters and that a girl named Kim Kaufman wants to help him. After their initial media blitz where they were trying to get their messages to Chris about fighting and to spread disparaging messages about Shanann, saying things like, "You'd have to be around her to know her," the Watts kind of fell back into the media background and a new channel came onto the scene. Revelation and the Reckoning, helmed by none other than Kim Kaufman, who was mentioned in the earlier calls between the Watts and their son. To my knowledge, this is the first channel to come about that was solely dedicated to discussing alternative theories on the Watts case. And she didn't just put out an alternative theory either. She put out a theory that picked up where the Watts left off, pinning Shanann as a hateful, abusive wife who drove her weak, helpless husband into a violent rage and killed her upon seeing her kill their children, rather than simply calling 911 like most normal people would do. This channel, Revelation and the Reckoning, amassed a ton of interest on YouTube because it was revealed that this creator had direct ties to the murderer, and she was sharing her conversations with him. Before long, more channels and Facebook groups sprung up to either debunk her theories or to dox her or to accuse her of being related to Nicole Kessinger, his mistress, or at least on the Kessinger payroll, because I guess there's now such thing as a Kessinger payroll. Because obviously, whatever she was doing, it was getting her a lot of attention. And on YouTube, the commodity is attention. People saw that you could get attention by tapping into the drama of whether Shanann had any involvement in the murders, which led to a precipitous rise in scrutinizing every single one of Shanann's social media posts, as if she herself was an accused murderer. Those are the early origins of what YouTubers call Watts Island, which now consists of a growing list of channels that are dedicated to picking sides on the Chris Watts case. Now that the Watts Island has been populated with a robust and diverse group of wannabe spies and investigators, the sides range across the spectrum from insisting that Chris is exactly where he should be and that he took a plea deal because he's guilty, to insisting that Chris was forced to take a plea deal and did kill Shanann but did not murder his kids, and all the way over to it was a psyop that was completely orchestrated and carried out by the Kessinger clan in cahoots with law enforcement. At around the same time, the Watts were talking behind the scenes to established creators that were connected to them through family, friends, and intermediaries. One of those creators was Critical K, who engaged in several private conversations with Cindy Watts. You should check out her full stream to hear the whole story, but in the process of getting to know Cindy, she felt a great sense of sympathy for the Watts, but she also noticed that the conversation consistently reverted over to bashing Shanann and her family. She would ask a question about the case, and it would turn soon into commentary about the Rusak's marriage or how Shanann's voice grated on Ronnie, because it matters so much, right? It's normal for mixed families to have acrimony, right? But it was impossible for Critical K, who marks her identity as a critical thinker, to notice that the Watts took their acrimony to an entirely new level. A level that really had little to do with their stated mission of getting to the truth and getting justice for Chris and the girls. That was probably one of the reasons that Kay was heavily involved in making sure that Chris had a personal conversation with his parents about what he told the FBI when they came to visit him in Wisconsin in February 2019. At that time, the Watts were on their Innocence March, but the Ruzeks were about to appear on the Dr. Phil show, and during that show, Chris's full confession was going to reveal that he, in fact, murdered the girls, not Shanann. Kay knew that Chris's parents were on a completely different wavelength as him, and that they shouldn't learn this shocking news at the exact time as the rest of the entire world, so she heavily encouraged the Watts intermediaries to make sure that the conversation happened before Dr. Phil aired. Once that conversation happened on March 4th, 2019, these intermediaries went live right afterward with Critical K to confirm that the conversation took place and to process their own personal shock and grief and disgust about this confession. All of the women on the stream expressed their heartbreak at knowing that Chris drove all the way from his house to Survey 19 with Shanann on the floorboard in a bag and the girls whimpering and complaining of the smell, and he couldn't think of a way to do anything else but dump their mother in a shallow grave, then murder the girls and put them down an 8-inch thief hatch of an oil well. It's rather heartbreaking to listen to this live stream from March 2019 because you can hear how all the women are slowly coming to their own realizations of the truth of the situation versus the reality. Their voices get shaky, they become emotional at one point or another. And Kelly, the closest family friend of all the people that inhabit Watts Island, still to this day, even goes so far as to say Chris should have just called Nicole Atkinson to come watch the kids so he could put a bullet in his own head. Critical K also confirms that she had personal conversations with Cindy Watts, who was completely broken and disgusted by the revelations and seemed to have accepted that Chris killed the whole family. And that's what most normal people would do, right? They would say, okay, I have the truth. He killed Shanann and the kids. He is where he belongs. I'm devastated, but I will continue with my life. Some of the creators who were formerly on the side of Shanann killed the girls flipped over to he did it. Let's stop bashing Shanann on YouTube and Facebook, and things on social media seemed to die down for a while. But then Shanann's reputation and profile started to improve, and people started to say, hey, gosh, I kind of like Shanann after all, and maybe her life wasn't so great toward the end of that marriage. I can start to see that things weren't so great. And Chris began to reveal more graphic details of what he did in his letters to Sherilyn Cadle, who printed his confessions in her book in September 2019. This book sparked a whole new wave of debate on the social webs, and naturally, a new wave of creators rose up to argue their positions based on the data they could scrape from public information, most of which was afforded to them through Shanann's many, many social media posts. Because that's what Shanann did for work. She sold herself as a happy, upbeat person as a result of Thrive. Like it or not, that was her job. At this point, Ronnie and Cindy fell far into the background, but those of us who followed the case couldn't help but notice that many new creators were pushing the same messages that the Watts had been trying to push before Chris made his jailhouse confession to them. Creators who had flipped from Chris's innocence to Chris's guilt started whistleblowing on the relationships between the Watts and the creators who were pushing the Shanann is terrible narrative. And for people who were paying close attention with a critical eye, could plainly see that there was a secretive, orchestrated effort to push this message. The message reached near peak velocity when Netflix had the nerve to produce a pro-Shanann documentary that told the story mostly through Shanann's social media posts and texts. Other people's social media posts and texts, but a lot of hers. This documentary predictably painted Chris into a bad light because her private messages to her friends show that he was being distant and aloof to her, that she was very confused, that she loved him very much, and that she suspected he was having an affair, but he consistently lied to her about it until one night she came home and he murdered her so he could have the life he desired with his mistress. I mean, that is how it worked out, right? She was right to be worried. Throughout the entire 2 years since Chris took his plea deal, There have been rumors flying around, fueled mostly by Kim Kaufman and her copycat channels, that Chris and the Watts family were planning to file a 35C petition for a new trial. After his jailhouse confession and then his subsequent confession in Cato's book came out, these rumors died down a bit, but they were never completely shut down by the Watts family, and nobody could ever quite understand that. But when the Netflix documentary came around and there was this huge influx of interest in the case on social media, and the Watts were not happy with the narrative and social media sentiment around it, we suddenly began to hear a very strong and repetitive drumbeat around Chris's 35C, and it was emanating out of the pro-Chris Watts channels. The social media world, especially on YouTube, was justifiably confused. Wait, didn't he take a plea? Didn't he confess on tape? Didn't the Watts admit he did it? Didn't he write it in letters that were printed in a book? This confusion was significantly exacerbated by the whipsaw-like triangulation that was happening behind the scenes. The Watts have a specific agenda, but since Chris has given several different confessions, we don't know his true agenda, and it seems to keep depending on who you talk to. If you talk to a friend of Cindy's, he's definitely doing the 35C and says he didn't kill the kids. If you talk to someone else who only writes with Chris and doesn't talk to the family, they will insist he doesn't want the 35C and is only doing it for his family. As the 35C rumors reached a fever pitch, we started to hear about a trip to Colorado that was being planned by Ronnie Watts and a group of supporters to film a documentary, gather unredacted discovery, and hire lawyers to mount a 35C plea. In the midst of this, Kim Kaufman announced that she was parting ways with the Watts and was not joining the Colorado trip. We also started hearing rumors that other members of the Watts cabal were falling away from them for various reasons. They weren't ever really clearly stated, but various reasons. And sometimes they were honest about the reasons, and sometimes they weren't. When they were honest about their reasons, they revealed conduct displayed by the Watts that ranged from toxic to potentially criminal. At the end of February of this year, our collective confusion level rose to a entirely new high when Jays for Justice released the rumored Colorado documentary, coupled with an announcement of a, quote, nonprofit, unquote, called Fight for a Family, and promised the launch of a 35 Chris website. A number of YouTubers, myself included, immediately tore into the validity, motivations, and potential for success for this nonprofit effort, pointing out that it was being organized by Lana Oriani, who just months before going to Colorado had created a zombie-like alter ego named Shazam for the specific reason of mocking Shanann in a Facebook group where Jamie and Ronnie were members. A number of us also pointed out that Lana has a bankruptcy fraud judgment against her in Ohio to the tune of $52,000 and therefore seems to be wholly unqualified to run a legal nonprofit. We also showed that this thing she was calling a nonprofit was not, in fact, a nonprofit because the terms and conditions of the website stated clearly that it was a company. Not long after the tube of you surfaced these truths about Lana, Jay for Justice announced that she was parting ways with Lana and the Watts and would no longer cover the Watts case. In the meantime, the website that Lana had promised would be available to us by this time to anyone who wants to fight for justice was still not fully operational. The split between Lana and Jay for Justice not only left Lana without a media partner, but created new and escalated divisions within the warring factions. Those of us who watched the case closely started to see new whistles blown and new revelations come out from a variety of creators who once supported the Watts but were slowly falling away after comparing notes with each other about the different lies they'd been told by the family. Things looked like such a mess on the surface that it seemed impossible for Lana and the Watts to find a legitimate legal team to take on a 35C petition, but lo and behold, Lana found some lawyers and told Critical K that she would go on a live and announce the legal team during a live. When we tuned in to see this announcement and Critical K asked her to announce a legal team, rather than giving the names like she said she would, she said, "I'm happy to announce the website is now live and you can learn who the lawyers are by registering and paying, which is a minimum of $30. I definitely checked and the website is more filled out than it used to be, and now it's teasing a podcast from Jamie Watts that's coming in April 2020. I refuse to give my personal details to this website because it's being run by a confirmed fraudster, and people who have signed up have reported receiving emails that include big groups of other people's email addresses they don't know, which is sketchy and unsafe as hell. So I've not gone digging around to see if Fight for a Family is fulfilling all of its promises. But 2 days after Lana future faked Critical K into a live broadcast about the lawyers, then refused to tell us who the lawyers were, forcing Critical K to reveal the lawyers and get Lana to confirm them on the air there, we learned through another live broadcast that Chris plans to revert to his very first confession and pin the blame on Shanann for the death of the girls. Folks, considering what I just laid out for you and everything we know to be true, the news that Chris is planning to use this defense in his 35C is twisted, disturbing, and dark. And what I'm about to show you is that it is 100% fueled by a very robust but destined to fail disinformation campaign backed entirely by the Watts family. I'm going to play some sound for you now, and after I play this sound, we'll continue our conversation. It's a short clip, but it's very important. What you're about to hear is the voice of Mel, who was once closely tied to the Watts family and served as an intermediary between Critical K and the Watts. She's since distanced herself from the Watts, but she was one of those emotional women on the live broadcast who could be heard trying to come to grips with just learning what Chris had done. This sound is from after that broadcast, after hearing everything Chris admitted to doing, and after Dr. Phil aired his special with the Rusex. Take a listen.
I meant to say that so many people believe that there's no way she could have killed them. However, I think there's just enough missing from the discovery that you can tell there are some serious gaps there. There are some things there that that really could just change people's minds. It just a few small details altered with the story that the DA gave, and it really could shift a lot of people to camp Chris Watts.
If you don't quite hear what she said there, Mel, someone who was formally aligned with the Watts but has since parted ways with them, said in a call that she thought would remain inside a closed group that they could use the sloppy investigation and holes in discovery to create new questions and narratives to help sow more confusion about his involvement. Critical K plays more of the sound in her most recent broadcast, and there you can hear Mel suggest that they introduced the idea of him having complex PTSD from his emotionally abusive relationship with Shanann, and that caused him to snap and kill his wife after seeing her kill his children. Folks, this is the very definition of disinformation, which is just a pretty way of saying lying with malicious intent. Most people think of disinformation in the counterintelligence space, government against government or government against its own people, and that indeed happens all the time. It's where the state knowingly lies to people for a specific political agenda. In this case, the Watts are the state. And every time they get flushed out by more YouTubers, they sink deeper and deeper and deeper into that deep state. Yes, the Watts are the deep state of Watts Island. To many of us, it's been pretty clear for a while that there's been a deep state operating in the background, and that they've been weaponizing a group of trolls to spread a set of lies across social media that would sow enough confusion and discord to support a 35C petition for Chris. One of the reasons I'm personally privy to this troll campaign is because I've become a target. That's because I've done 2 relatively popular critiques of Watts Island, and I like to call it Planet Watts, and my comment section is riddled with hatred and vitriol about Shanann and wild conspiracy theories about Chris's total innocence. One creator who makes it very clear that she's a friend of Cindy Watts, but is not trying to defend Chris, only wants truth and justice. Only. Has not only left lengthy comments on my videos, but has made sure I'm aware that she's going to shout me out on her live broadcasts and on all the other broadcasts that she goes on. Okay. A different person who's apparently known on the socials as a Chris defender told me they would send me proof and evidence that there's no way Chris could have done it. When I received an email with her facts and evidence, her arguments matched the YouTube creator's arguments virtually word for word, and predictably did not prove anything. It was nothing new. When two different people with varying affiliations come at you with the same exact arguments using nearly the same exact words and phrases, you have to think about how those messages originated and why. With my professional hat on, and after playing with words and messages for big and small companies for 25 years in an ethically responsible way, it wasn't difficult for me to look behind the curtain and come to an informed conclusion that it was coming from Planet Watts. But when I heard that sound of Mel talking about how to orchestrate things in the background, I was blown away to the point of infuriation. And I decided to put all of my professional hats on and do some message analysis in the scope of humane technology. That's where we analyze misinformation and disinformation on social media. So first, I sat and listened very, very carefully to the words that Lana used and didn't use to talk about the new website and the 35C petition, and I paid close attention to how she answered questions. While she talked, I took copious notes, and I wrote down all the words she used, and I put them in a spreadsheet. Then I downloaded all the comments from my videos and pulled out just the comments that were arguing on behalf of the Watts in some way, and I pulled out all of those messages and put them in the same spreadsheet. Then I took the words that are used on the Fight for a Family website to describe what they're doing, and I put those in the same spreadsheet. And then with all those words, I did a super old-fashioned marketer's technique. I made a word cloud. Marketers make word clouds to get an understanding of which words and messages are used most to describe their company or product. Word clouds can be thought of as tools, like a lie detector test. They give a directional indicator of the primary messages that are emanating from a specific entity or person. Marketers can use these as a guide to whether they need to tone down some words or ratchet up use of other words or messages. On the other side of things, members of the public or the message recipients can use word clouds to try to understand the primary messages that a company or person is trying to get across, or if their words actually match their actions. So here I present to you in all its glory the Planet Watts, aka Watts Island word cloud. Does anything here surprise you? Does anything here not surprise you? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think. But if you landed on Planet Watts from a completely different universe and had never heard of this case, and someone came to you and someone gave you 3 tries to guess what kind of organization was using these words, I bet you'd say something like it's a law firm or a civil rights advocacy or a nonprofit or something like that, right? But it isn't, folks. That is so far from what Fight for a Family really is. As I said, the other thing I did was I listened very carefully to the way Lana answered critical case questions during the live broadcast. And as I listened, I could hear very clearly what she was saying while not coming right out and saying it. I'm going to decode those messages for you here and give you my translation key. I'm not going to play the sound for you because it's from another creator's broadcast. I'll link to it below, but I'm just going to give you the timestamp and tell you what Lana said, and then I'll tell you what she actually means. So at around 4:24, she says that Fight for a Family was born out of necessity to suppress a noise and lift the victims of the family. So what she's saying there, it's there to suppress the noise. So she's not saying this is a legal fund, we're going to put it toward legal battles and legal causes. She's saying we want to suppress noise. At 6:28, she says Fight for a Family is for several cases, where each case is going to have a broadcast. Okay, again, is that a legal activity? And she says that between all kinds of other things that she says. She just kind of weaves it in there. And she says it after being asked more of a, what's your legal strategy kind of question. And then she throws these words in here. And then at around 10:32, they're talking about the money. And she says, and that would come out of the nonprofit. And the first word out of Lana's mouth is no. Because depending on how everything worked out with productions wanting to help with that. So it's not only incoherent, but what she's saying is that they're creating a media company and they're going out to production companies to try to hire them to create the media for these families so that their voices can be heard. That's not a legal strategy. That's a media strategy. Okay? There's several more instances in the broadcast where Lana says the website is to give the Watson family who find themselves in this position to give them a voice. So what she's basically saying is the Watts have been victimized by the masses and their voices have not been heard. And they need their voices to be heard because they are victims too. They've been painted in the wrong light and they deserve to be painted in the right light. So we're giving them a platform to do that. Also, throughout the interview, Critical K tries to get her to talk about the case because Lana apparently said that she was willing to talk about the new evidence that indicates Chris's rights were violated. But when Critical K starts to ask Lana questions about the new evidence, she becomes evasive and all of a sudden she doesn't have time to complete the interview because too much time was wasted on all the drama and the gossip. So that makes two different future fakes to a pretty large social media audience in one night. Lana is such an overachiever. Naturally, she left the audience feeling even more confused, frustrated, and worried than ever. And here's why. That's the whole point. Fight for a Family is not what it's trying to make you think it is. Fight for a Family is trying to make you think they're a charity. And that when you donate to this charity, you're contributing to the noble cause of helping wrongfully convicted criminals fight for their legal battles. That's not what Fight for a Family is. Fight for a Family is a media organization. This media organization is being put together to elevate the voices of certain chosen families through self-produced podcasts and presumably other social media. These families are hand-chosen by Lana, that stalwart warrior for truth and justice. And the first family is, ta-da, the Watts. If Lana had truth serum, this is what Lana would actually really be saying between all those weird phrases in that broadcast. The Watts have tried for 2 years to convince the public through the press and social media that their son is innocent, but it hasn't worked. So we're creating a media company where they get to say whatever they want without being challenged. We're telling you that it's a nonprofit to help several families fight for justice, but not being forthright about that or exactly where people's money is going, because if we tell you that we're raising money for a media company where the Watts get to say whatever they want, you're less likely to contribute. The reason my answers about everything having to do with the case are evasive and confusing is because I know nothing about criminal defense law or putting together a nonprofit. I do, however, know how to make it look a lot like I know a lot of professional things, and I do know how to repeat the words that we've all agreed to say to all the people. So I'm here now repeating those words, and if you don't believe them, that's your problem. I'm paraphrasing, folks, but that's what's happening. But even calling it a media company is slapping a massive layer of lip gloss on a big pig, because legitimate media companies don't intentionally disseminate lies to their audience, and they don't intentionally send trolls and political operatives out to the social media landscape to say the exact same words on their behalf everywhere, to slander a murder victim. So Fight for a Family is much better characterized as a propaganda machine, masquerading as a charitable cause. While everyone else is caught up in whether their dollars are being funneled toward the big fancy retainer that had to be paid to the lawyers, money is being gathered in the name of charity for the real cause of paying the salaries of a family of propagandists. That's what makes this so very dark. Not only have the Watts willfully ignored their son's many confessions about killing his wife and children, they spent more than 2 years making sure that everyone who cares about the case experiences grief at the same pace as theirs by doubling, tripling, and quadrupling down on a false and hurtful narrative. They drag people along with them on their quest to spread the narrative. But as they keep getting fleshed out by things like insistence on facts and critical thinking, they dig deeper and deeper and deeper, all the way to the depths of letting the likes of people like Lana Oriani talk them into launching a propaganda house where they can say whatever they want without being challenged. That's where it's come to, folks. The Watts have worked with a fraudster to stand up a propaganda house masquerading as a charity. So what does this mean for the 35C? What if we contribute money and they don't get it? And it doesn't work. Well, Lana has that covered too, because Fight for a Family isn't just for the Watts. It's there for, count them, four different families who find themselves in the same position of losing their voices. It's fail-proof, right? Don't fall for it, folks. Don't fall for it. Another thing we do in the marketing space is capture the primary narratives that spring out of a company or group and analyze the narrative against the facts as they're known. So what I'd like to do in conclusion here is go through the primary narratives that have come blasting at me through the atmosphere of Planet Watts, as the deep state has attempted to get me to believe some version of Chris's innocence, and then give you my opinion of how those narratives stack up against the facts. So, narrative one is that the Watts were completely excluded from Chris's due process by the defense team and the prosecution, despite the fact that they were victims. This is somehow picked up and repeated and believed without asking,
says who?
Says who? Who said that they were excluded? Because they talked to him during the plea deal, right before he took his plea deal, and Chris has said that he told his parents what he was doing, and we don't know if it was law enforcement that was keeping them out or if it was Chris that was keeping them out. And also, Chris is not a minor child. So as people who might have been connected to the crime, they actually didn't really have the right to talk to him, because they might be passing information back and forth about how to get away with this crime. The next narrative is Chris is easily led by women in law enforcement. So what we're to believe is that Chris doesn't make any decisions on his own, and that he was led by Shanann into killing her. Okay. And then he was led by law enforcement to confess, because he just has no backbone of his own. But he was able to have an affair and potentially more on his wife. Next narrative is he was forced into a false confession. But if anybody else was watching Armchair Detective's readout of Tammy Lee's notes that were just posted from her FBI interview, she states very clearly that Chris states, "I didn't want my lawyers to lie for me for 2 years." And he said to Tammy Lee and the people who went to talk to him there that he asked for the plea deal. He wanted that plea deal. He wanted it to end. He didn't want everybody to have to sit through the courtroom drama of what he had done. The next narrative that flies around that is, in my mind, easily debunked is that since Bella fought, her killer, whoever killed her, must have defensive wounds, and neither Chris nor Shanann, who some people are still fighting for Shanann's innocence. Since Chris and Shanann, neither of them have defensive wounds on their hands, well, it's impossible that one of them killed Bella. And you know, she obviously fought because she bit through her tongue. But there's no defensive wounds on Chris. Well, you guys, Bella was 40 pounds. She was a tiny little girl. She was light and not super, not super beefy. And now you've got roided out, allegedly, Chris, at least thrived out Chris, 185 pounds heavier than her, who's angry. You think he's going to sustain defensive wounds on Bella? Sorry. The other narrative that's flying around that is completely false is that the Watts don't have a voice. The Watts have a voice. The Watts can go on TV whenever they want. The Watts can go on YouTube whenever they want. The Watts can start their own channel and talk whenever they want. What they don't like is that no one is buying into their story. Or at least not everyone is buying into their story. The other thing is that people say innocent people confess every day. And that's why we have the Innocence Project. But Chris isn't innocent. And that's why Chris has turned down working with legitimate innocence projects and pro bono lawyers and forensic pathologists, because when they start to dig around and get into the facts, they get turned away. And how about he has PTSD from his past home life with Shanann, and he just didn't know what he was thinking. He has complex PTSD. I'm sorry, you guys. That is just ridiculous. You don't get complex PTSD is something I have, and it comes about from childhood trauma. So if you want to blame the murders of Shanann and the girls on complex PTSD, you're going to have to look at the Watts on that. Sorry. It's not from an 8-year marriage to a somewhat or overbearing wife. And one thing that actually my mind changed on is I used to be, and this is also something that has flown around a lot. Well, if Tammy Lee hadn't introduced the idea of Shanann doing what she did, then we wouldn't be in this position and he wouldn't have blamed her. And therefore, it must be true. Well, no. Actually, that doesn't account for the note that the Watts had Chris write on August 6th, saying, if something happens to me, investigate my wife. If he wrote that on August 6th, and now it's August 13th, Tammy Lee wasn't the first person putting that idea in his head. So those are just some of the narratives that get repeated and are just like easily swatted away. But you have to think about it. You have to go like 1 or 2 clicks deep. In all honesty, folks, I don't think their campaign is going to be fully successful in what they want to do. It'll definitely be successful in sowing anger and discord on social media for the next several months, but this little propaganda strategy shows how desperate they are to be seen in a certain way. And that won't work out for them. Here's their main problem. For propaganda to be successful, it needs to resemble a morsel of the truth, and it needs to have a receptive audience. Unfortunately for the Watts, the further down into the mug they dig, the further they get away from the truth, and the further they get away from a receptive audience. Was Lana able to just launch her website and hope that people discovered it and started paying for the service? No. She had to make sure certain people knew about it. So she depended on a YouTuber, a true crime YouTuber with a large platform, Critical K. But to get that opportunity, she lied and was called out for it. If she's willing to lie to get on a live broadcast and announce her media company but call it a charity, and do all the other stuff so many YouTubers have shown that she's capable of doing, what else do you think she's capable of doing? Surely I'm not the only person thinking this, so their audience will continue to fall. Lana will keep burning bridges. Why should people allow her to use their platform if she's just going to lie to them? In April, when Jamie's podcast is published, where is it going to be published and how will people know about it? Well, they were going to use J4Justice's platform, but they burned that bridge, so they're going to need to find some other way to get it out there. They'll either rope in another bottom dweller who's willing to grift up for that ride, or they'll notice that fewer and fewer people are willing to entertain their BS on their channel, and they will be stuck in their own little echo chamber over there at Fight for a Family, Planet Watts. Do you know what happens in echo chambers? People just sit there and listen to their own thoughts, determined to believe only what they decide to believe based on what they feel. And only they allow information to come into that chamber that agrees with their echo. This is nothing to echo, folks. These are lies that cause real consequences to real people. Congratulations, you guys. You got your legal team. Now go away and fight that legal fight and tell us when it's over. We don't need to know until there's an outcome. That's it. We don't need to hear Jamie paint her murderous brother as a saint and her murdered sister-in-law as an emotionally abusive animal while she's literally in the process of emotionally torturing that victim's family. And by the way, as a legitimate sufferer of complex PTSD, fuck you for completely mischaracterizing how people get it and how it affects people who have it. You could build an entire Fox News channel with a full set of anchors saying all day long that Chris is a saint and Shanann was a horrible person, and we'd still see it for what it is. And your little echo chamber will eventually be just you talking to yourself and lying to yourself. Because it's irrefutable. The Watts know Chris did it. They don't care. The Watts intermediaries know he did it. They don't care. The Watts and Lana say they're creating a nonprofit, but they are really creating a way to spread pro-Watts propaganda. They are therefore knowingly spreading disinformation and asking you to fund it for them. Don't do it, Watts. Don't do it. Just pay your lawyers and do their jobs and stay classy in the background. I know the Watts won't take my advice, but I hope that after watching this video, at least my viewers can walk away and look into any video that proclaims Watts' innocence or Shanann's hatefulness with their eyes wide open about the dynamics at play here on Planet Watts. Just remember to buckle your seatbelts, listen carefully to the words, and then pay attention to whether their words match their actions. Have a great day, and thanks for watching.